Okay, so you know how to beat match, you know how to use the EQ buttons, you're filtering out the lows while mixing, but your transition still doesn't sound good. Well, let's have a look at phase mixing and how you can make your transitions even better. In my crash course video on DJing, I already talked about beats, bars and phrases.
One beat is like the kick. 4 beats is a bar, and 8 bars is most commonly a phrase.
Now, let's have a closer look. So if we look at this waveform, you can see a track consists out of different elements, different blocks if you will. For example, you have an intro, over here I think build up, a break, a chorus, second break, and at the end an outro. All these elements consist out of bars. Most commonly you will hear something changing in music around 8 bars, and that is what we call a phrase. So for example, let's have a look at the intro and let's just count the bars. So I'll play the track and count with it. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Groovy, let's do it.
You hear? Yeah. So that were 8 bars, and then you could hear the bass of the track hit it in. So you hear a musical change in the track. Now, this goes on through the whole track. So, for example, here we had intro, but here, if we listen at this part and also have a count, you can hear that after 8 bars, again, something will change. So let's just have a listen.
Let's do it.
So in this case you hear a shaker coming up after 8 bars. Now let's move to the next part. We can do this again over and over, and you will hear that the track keeps evolving and keeps adding sounds or changing in sounds. There's something changing. So let's check out this next part and see if we hear a change again after 8 bars. Again you could hear a vocal, and then again some new hi-hats were introduced for this last part. Now, okay, and if you have a look at this last part, you can see in the waveform that here begins some kind of break. So that's a visual indicator that this phrase has ended and a new phrase started. Here you can see that the drop of the chorus begins. Here you see some dips. I call them dips in tracks. You see a dip as well here and here. Those dips are very important for DJs. When I DJ, I look at the waveform on the CDJs, I will show you later, and I will look at these dips. These dips are for me reminders where a phrase ends and where a new phrase begins. So when I want to mix in a new track, for example, this could be a good point. But it also depends on the track, so know your tracks, have listened to them. For example, if I listen to this part where this dip is, there's still very much happening, but it could be a good point to start the intro of my second track. But it also depends on the intro of that track. If that intro of the track is too much, has a lot of mids and highs as well, then it can get too muddy to mix in. In that case, we can have a look we can just have a look at a later point in a track, maybe the outro. So let's have a listen to the end of the track, check if there's a place which will be more suitable for mixing in a new track. So let's have a listen over here. Yeah, here the track is still pounding, there's a lot happening over here. Let's have a listen when it gets a bit more quiet, a bit less happening. Okay. So that was the outro, and you could hear that the track is actually building off, if you can call it like that. There's less and less elements in there, so there's more room for your second track. So this might be a great place to start mixing in your second track. So you can see that a track consists out of different elements, different phrases, where you can hear something is changing in the track. For example, something is being added, like a shaker or a hi-hat. Or you can see in the waveform that the break is beginning. Or you can see later on in the tracks small dips in the waveform that indicates that a new phrase is beginning. Well, those are crucial for me as a DJ, because I know that those are points where I could possibly mix in a new track. So the new track will be on phrase. Because I want the two tracks to be aligned. I want them to be aligned in the phrases. So when something changes in track A, there's also something changing in track B. When they are not aligned, then here there's something changing in track A and here in track B. For example, there are 2 bars between the changes. That sounds very off. So that is what's going wrong in your transitions. If it's not, if the phrases are not aligned. So if the tracks is not aligned in phrases, you will hear some changes with some bars between it. It might sound very off, but it also depends on the track. Maybe you can get away with it, but if you want to do it good and you want to do it better, if you want to do it clean, then you have to phrase mix. So you have to align the tracks on phrases.
So here I have my first track, and my goal is to mix in over here. My goal is to mix in over here, where the second chorus begins, the drop. Let's have a listen how it sounds. So normally that is the point where I want to mix in, but now in this case I will miss it with just a bar or so maybe, so it isn't in phase. Let's have a listen how that sounds. That's a good indicator. That's a new phase up there. My goal is to mix this track in at the end of the intro. You can see here an intro. There you can see in the waveform that the new phrase is beginning. There I want to switch the track, flip the lows. So just before that I will cut the lows here. So you can see here it begins. Cut the lows. Sounded a bit off. Timing wasn't right. You could hear? you could hear that first there is a change over here, and then is a small change over here. So that sounds a bit off in this case. When I cut the lows there and introduced the lows of the second track, between them there was something changing over here that messed the transition a bit up. So you could hear it wasn't that clean. Now let's have a listen how it sounds when you mix in phrase. That was an indicator of the next phrase. So I want to mix in right there. So I will hit the lows almost. Yeah. So now you could clearly hear when I bring in the lows of the second track, there was also a change in this track. So those lined up perfectly, and the change of the track change, the transition was better. So that's it guys. I hope you learned something today, and good luck with phrase mixing. Thanks for watching. Peace.